How the Light Gets In is the Institute of Art and Ideas' unique festival, combining days full of talks and debates in philosophy, politics, arts and science, with evenings full of music and dance. Get your tickets for the world's largest music and philosophy festival at howthelightgetsin.org.
There was a book that I wrote called The Language Hoax several years ago, where I was just writing about this sapir-whorf hypothesis that languages make you see the world in a different way. And I reiterate that to a small extent they do, but it's a really small extent that I don't think qualifies as something that most humanists would be interested in. And so, for example, in Russian there are two words for blue. One of them refers to dark blue, one of them refers to the blue that's the cap on that bottle. There is no just blue word. And if you do an experiment, you can show that Russians are very, 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 very slightly better than English speakers at delineating exactly where dark blue shades off into light blue. It's just that color, it's a very tiny difference. And so that's neat in itself, but what? You know, if you know any Russian, what does that have to do with Russianness? And all of the experiments come out that way. And so what I worry about with the quote-unquote hoax is that you're always given the cool examples. So, wow, Russians see blue in a landscape like this right here. Supposedly to be Russian is to see that somehow more vibrantly than most of us see it. And you think, well, wow, that's really interesting. Or you learn that Japanese people, because of one of the quirks of their grammar, are more sensitive to materials than we are. And so you think, wow, they're more sensitive, and we English speakers are kind of these dullards. And it really ends up feeling good, but there are all sorts of crummy things you can end up saying about people based on what is or what isn't in their language. And I won't go through them now because it would take up too much time, but you can look at any language and based on that perspective, designate people as sexist, as racist. Things that are not in a language can make people look, frankly, kind of dim. This includes everybody in China. And so that whole perspective that what's in the grammar or how they cut the world up with words makes people cool ends up also making people seem uncool. And if you don't want the uncool, which I don't think most of us do, you immediately learn these things and you say, well, that couldn't have anything to do with what the people are like, then that has to also go for the cool things too. And so that's why I think of these differences as dancing upon what most of us would find crucial. But it's not that those things aren't there. But for example, very quickly, Mandarin Chinese speakers have been shown to process counterfactuality a tiny bit more slowly than other people, because you can't say had been, would have in Mandarin Chinese. Tiny bit less sensitive. Do you want to say that people who speak Mandarin aren't as good at processing hypotheticality as the rest of us? Of course not. We just reject that. Well, and same thing with the Russians and the Blues. You have to be uniform about it.
And is there a thing that there's no control there in that? You can't ever take the same individual and induct them compulsorily from birth into English and then take that individual and induct them into Mandarin Chinese and look at the differences in their perception of the world. I mean, you'd need that individual to obediently bifurcate and live their life twice in two different languages.
And that would be a hard experiment to...
It's quite hard to run, yeah.
They definitely looked at people with different amounts of experience with English at different times in their lives. And the more Chinese you've got, the less you are good at pressing buttons at certain times or resolving certain elaborate little word games. You don't do them as quickly. And that's a disturbing experiment that you kind of wish the person hadn't done, which shapes my perception, so to speak, of all of the Whorfian experiments.
Get your tickets for the world's largest music and philosophy festival at howthelightgetsin.org.